We're in chapter 5, verse 1 through 3. Amos laments over the imminent fall of Israel. In verses 4 through 9, he gives another appeal for them to return to God. Yes, national judgment was certain, but he calls for individual repentance in verse 4. In verses 5 through 6, he says, don't go to the religious centers to seek God. He's talking about Bethel and Gilgal. He's saying, don't go there. We're not talking about ritualistic worship. He's saying, seek God by doing good. Israel had turned justice into bitterness, into injustice. That's what we read in verse 7. So what is justice? Well, the societal definition is punishing people who commit unjust acts. It's punishing someone who breaks the law. However, biblical justice is helping the needy and oppressed. That's the biblical definition. I didn't go over this, but in chapter 4 of Amos, verse 11, I don't know if you caught this, but it says, I overthrew you as God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah is from Genesis 19. They were the epitome of evil and disgrace. In the book of Ezekiel 16, verse 47, he says, but you acted more corruptly than them. And you're like, what? More corrupt than Sodom and Gomorrah? I mean, what was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, it was social injustice rather than sexual perversion, as some people think. And I'll read Ezekiel 16, verse 49. It says, behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy, which is exactly what we're reading in this story of Amos. This book is about their pride, their luxurious indulgence, and their complacency. The kind of obedience God expects from his people is to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God. In verses 8 through 9, Amos says, seek him who is the God of the physical universe. Because part of their idolatry was astral worship. They worshiped the stars rather than the one who created the stars. Astrology is the backbone of the ancient religion of Babylon. In Genesis chapter 11, after the flood, the whole earth had one language. This was ancient Babylonia, and the people built the famous Tower of Babel. Now that word, tower, is a word that can mean ziggurat, which is an ancient observatory for gazing at the stars. Now Nimrod was the leader of the Tower of Babel, and what's interesting is Nimrod is identified with the constellation Orion, the giant hunter in the sky. So notice what the verse reads in Amos chapter 5, verse 8. It says, he who made Pleiades and Orion. It is God saying he made the constellations. He made man. I mean, what happened at the Tower of Babel was the origin of idol worship, and not only idol worship, but worship of self. So you may ask, well, what's the problem with astrology? It's an attempt to be God. It's the belief that you'll obtain some special wisdom and knowledge about your future. And I believe that's silly because man's fate is controlled by God alone. In verses 10 through 13, they acquired these possessions through injustice, and God is going to take away their prosperity. In verses 14 and 15, he says, seek God, hate evil, and love good, and perhaps God will be gracious.